Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska. I also teach primarily these days online. My guest today is Glenn Park, who is a healer, a teacher, author, a workshop leader, and trainer with over 30 years experience as an Alexander Technique teacher, and she also does chakra healing therapy. And she's given talks and run workshops around the world on those topics. Her latest book, which is called Chakra Healing Therapy, Awaken Spiritual Energies and Heal Emotional Wounds. And I will just hold up a copy for our video audience to see. There it is. And you can order it through her website, which we'll put a link to by the interview. She explores the chakras in depth as an embodied map of the psyche, drawing parallels between Eastern wisdom and modern Western research. So, Glenn, welcome to the program today.
Thank you,
It's
Robert.
good to
Thank you.
talk to you.
Lovely.
I should
Very pleased
mention
to be here.
you live in, is it Ireland? You live in
Oh,
Ireland or
no,
England?
England.
In
England.
England, okay. And I assume you teach a fair amount online these days.
Well,
Uh,
I haven't been teaching online because I've written this book, and the whole my whole teaching practice has got to be reassessed now.
oh, okay. Well, um, so I think a lot of our listeners don't know a lot or maybe really nothing about either of these two topics, the Alexander
Okay.
technique and
Yeah.
chakra healing and chakras in general, chakra healing therapy. Could you begin by just giving a very short description, definition of the Alexander technique first, and then what's chakra healing therapy? And
Fine. Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So the Alexander technique is a technique that helps people to move in a good way, in a way that's good for the body. It teaches simple movements like walking, bending, sitting and standing, and more complicated movements like playing a musical instrument or sports activities. So um, if you have Alexander lessons, there are two sides to it. One is that you're being taught these principles of movement, which help the body come into balance and help it have healthy functioning, really. And also, Alexander teachers work with their hands in a very gentle way. So you get a sort of treatment as well as a lesson when you see an Alexander teacher. It brings the musculature into balance. So you're getting help to move and your body's being helped to get into balance with these work with the hands as well.
Mhm.
So it's good value for money.
Yeah, absolutely. And how about chakra therapy? What is
Well,
that? Maybe it would be good to tell our viewers and listeners what are chakras.
okay, well, I'll start by just explaining what happened with me. I found that sometimes when I was giving an Alexander lesson, which is the the work that we do is describing very simply and physically how to move the body well. But I would sometimes find that with this gentle work with the hands, it might set off somebody might start crying. That they might have a muscular release and start to cry, or they might have an emotional memory surface from some past trauma. And I began to feel I had to find a way of working at that psychological level as well as at the physical level of showing good ways to move.
Mhm.
I mean, a good example of this was a lovely man came to see me who had got a, a, his spine hadn't developed properly. The lower vertebrae of the spine were all sort of knotted together, and he was very short in stature as a result and had constant discomfort in his spine. So he came for Alexander lessons, and I was working when he was lying down for this work on the table, and I had my hands on the lumbar area of the spine, back and front,
Mhm.
and he suddenly had this memory surface of when he was a young child and he'd gone to the playground with his grandfather and fallen off the slide and was really hurt and really upset. And I'm afraid what his grandfather did was said, stop crying, just get up that slide and slide down it again. This is good old English stiff upper lip, you know,
Wow.
just
Yeah.
get on with it. So this poor little boy had to go and do what his granddad had said. And when he had this memory, he said, that's what's caused my back problem. Because it wasn't only the trauma of the fall, where he fell and crushed the spine, but the emotional trauma of not being able to release it through his tears and so on. So at that point, I started to work with the chakras to help the energy flow in that wounded child in the second chakra. I'll explain that in a minute. So I worked on the chakras on either side of this spine and got the flowing energy through. And he did end up not being in any discomfort anymore. I mean, he still had the tightness there, but he was able to manage it and not be in pain. So that's a good example of how I found myself working with both areas.
Right. So, and
Okay.
could you say, like, a very short description of what is a chakra?
Yes. Chakras were first written about in the 3rd millennium BC by Hindu yoga masters. And they got to understand the chakras through meditation and spiritual inspiration. The word chakra is a Sanskrit word, and it means a wheel or a disc, something circular. And clairvoyants who can see the chakras, they see these circular energy centers that are sort of rotating. They're all located in the spine, except the 7th, which is in the center of the brain. And they link to different types of consciousness. And the thing that really I love about the chakras is that it's a way of having a whole body consciousness, not just the idea that our consciousness is just in our heads and the rest of our body's like a machine. I don't like that at all. You know, sensations, emotions, thoughts, it's all part of our consciousness, and it's a whole body thing. And the chakras work really well with that. So if I'm going to, I'll run quickly through how I see the chakras, just to give a very quick idea of what they are. We start at the base of the spine, the tip of the coccyx, with the base chakra. And this is dominant during the fetus, the time in the womb, and the early year or 2 of life, when the little baby is just focused on survival. It's our inner animal, it's our instinctual consciousness. It's there just trying to keep us alive all the time. We all have this inner animal working away for us, which we ignore most of the time. And then in childhood, you get to the sacral chakra, which is at the top of the sacrum. And that's the inner child. That chakra is focused on relationship, sensual exploration, very emotional. The child is wanting to be happy, wanting pleasure, wanting to feel close to people. And this is our sacral chakra energy, the pleasure center. And it's our inner child that carries on wanting that sort of easy, simple happiness throughout life. Then moving to the 3rd chakra, that's the solar plexus chakra, the area of the solar plexus. It's where the lumbar spine meets the bottom of the thoracic spine. And that's dominant in adolescence. So it becomes much more about thinking. There's huge shifts in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex during adolescence. And that links with this chakra, which is more about complex thinking. It's about delayed gratification rather than the instant gratification of the 2nd chakra. And it's where we start to decide what kind of adult we're going to become. So it's where we have our inner judges, where we start to make values. So I say it's the home of the inner critic and the inner champion, our inner judges, and that's the 3rd chakra. And those 3 chakras are all dominant in stages of life. then we get to the heart chakra and the upper chakras. The heart chakra is a real game changer. It's where we experience those deeper emotions, where those boundaries that we've developed in the separate self of the ego in the lower chakras, they just start to dissolve. We feel really moved by the beauty of nature, or the beauty of art, or we feel unconditional love for someone, or just appreciation of life. It's a very heart-opening chakra, and this is our inner healer, because once we get to that energy, that lovely, accepting, appreciating, loving energy of the heart, we start to heal our own inner wounds of the lower chakras. So it does that. It heals the lower wounds, and it also opens us up energetically to receive more inspirational energy from the crown chakra at the top of the head, down through the spine to the heart. And that opens up the inspirational levels of the upper chakras. So very quickly with the upper chakras, we've got a creative communicator, a creative performer in the throat chakra, and a creative thinker here in the eye chakra. This is very prominent in academics and writers. This is artists and performers, speakers. And then finally, the crown chakra is where we have the potential to become fully awakened, as many spiritual traditions would describe, a sort of enlightened consciousness. We have that potential. I don't say we've all got it.
Right.
So that gives you a quick run through of the chakras and how they represent all these different aspects of the self.
So just a naive question from someone who doesn't know any more about chakras than you've just described. Would you say that they are all they're all part of an interconnected system? They're not isolated centers operating on their own.
That's right.
It's an integrated process.
Yes.
And you
So
had mentioned, well, just to relate that to the Alexander technique, which is also a pretty darn integrated process. I mean, Alexander was, from his experience early on, was kind of forced into the conclusion that it wasn't even so much that mind and body are interconnected, which everyone talks about now, but not in Australia in the 1890s. But he also said, really, it's more than that. Mind and body are just two words to describe the same thing, different aspects of it.
Absolutely.
And he was forced into that understanding by his experience. He didn't set out to be a mind-body expert. He set out to fix his voice problem. But so that and chakra therapy do have that in common, then, that they are a whole body system. I assume that in chakra therapy, you wouldn't want to do all the work with one chakra because others are going to have to fit in with it, and so on, right? And that would be very Alexandrian, let's say, in nature.
I mean, you do have to start with the base chakra. You do have to sort of work developmentally with them, because if you worked on all the top chakras, you could leave somebody with a horrible headache, actually. So you do have to start making sure that somebody's connected to the earth with the base chakra, and that energy is flowing through the second. There's this constant flow from the earth through the feet and legs, through the body, up the spine, to the crown chakra and out. And there's a constant downward flow from into the top of the head, down through the body and out through the feet. So you're working with those two flows all the time.
So could you give an example of how you might work with someone using both chakra therapy ideas and Alexander ideas?
Yeah, sure. So yes, this is an example I actually write about in the book. It was a delightful young man in his 20s came to see me, and he was wanting to become a very good flamenco dancer. He was going to flamenco classes. he had got access to a studio. So every evening after work, he went and practiced flamenco dancing. You do know what I mean by this, this
Sure.
Spanish,
Yep.
very
Yep.
exciting
Very
dancing.
stylized
Yes,
form of dancing. Yeah.
yes. And he was practicing every evening, as I said, and he found that he was getting lower back pain and that he was not able to sleep. He was just completely wired when he went to bed. So first of all, we started to work with the Alexander technique, and you imagine a flamenco dancer, they often just sort of push their chests out, tighten in the lower back, and that's exactly what was causing his back pain and his inability to sleep. We started to look at flamenco dancers who didn't do it quite like that, and he began to find a different way of. I'm awfully sorry, I've got the front door ringing. That's why I keep pausing. The front door bell. Is it possible to cut this and briefly or not? No. I am sorry. I'll carry on. Right, where the
arching of his back and lifting his chest, I assume, that kind of pattern. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. So we worked with getting the energy through the spine, and he began to sleep well, and he wasn't in pain anymore. He was getting his flamenco dancing good with his spine and his sleep. But he said to me, I'm still not getting this really strong feeling of power that I was hoping to get when I became a flamenco dancer. So I said, I think we'd better work with the chakras in that case. So we started to work. He had a very good sacral chakra, good base chakra, after the work we'd done already, actually, because I was grounding him a bit with the base chakra when I was doing that connecting. But also then we got to the third chakra, and his solar plexus chakra was in trouble. This was a young man in his 20s, and he was struggling with a very strong inner critic who was constantly making life difficult for him. And so we started to work with building a strong inner champion. I got him to write down all the things that he'd achieved in his life, all the successes he'd had, things that he owned that he felt really pleased about. He'd got a very nice bicycle and things like that. Also, he'd got a very nice girlfriend. And when you talk about the solar plexus chakra, you can discuss ownership in that way, not in the other chakras.
Right.
And we looked at challenges he'd overcome, and we got him to write his life story from the perspective of an inner champion who could see no wrong, that he'd done no wrong in his life. He just described it all from that position of the inner champion. And he did start to build a much more confident self. And it really showed in his dancing. His dancing got better and better. And at the end of the session, he said to me, well, actually, I was attracted to flamenco dancing because I wanted to build confidence. I wanted to look strong and powerful like these flamenco dancers. And it's been a bit of a roundabout way of doing it, but I've got there. So, it got there through working on that third chakra.
Right.
So
I was interested in you saying, well, there's energy flowing up from the earth, and there's also energy coming down from the crown chakra.
Universe.
And that is interesting because, in fact, in just forgetting about chakras for a moment, that is the situation we're all in. We're getting an upward push from whatever surface we're on from the earth. And that's not a metaphor. It's a for real upward push. And the gravitational pull is drawing us straight down to the center of the earth. And it certainly is affecting our head and causing our head to tilt a little forward, which brings about an upward release a la Alexander technique. So it seems like both systems are recognize that there are those two directional forces, equal and opposite, that are operating on us.
Yes,
And I would describe in one way the Alexander technique as being a way to make the best use of those, given that we're living on this planet right now, and those are the forces we're dealing with. So we might as well
absolutely.
use them
Yes,
well.
yes.
And you're approaching it from a different system that is also based
Working.
on those two directional
Yes.
flows.
Mm,
So, I
yeah.
mean, that helps me as someone who doesn't know really anything about
Yeah.
chakra therapy, uh, that helps me understand how they could easily be
Work together.
combined or emphasize one more
Mm,
in teaching at a certain point in lessons and the other.
mm.
Um, do you want to say more about the connection between the technique and chakra therapy, or perhaps give another example? I think we would have time for like one more specific example, whatever you think is would be
Well,
most
one thing
useful.
I'd like to just talk about that I've tried to do in the book is
Hmm.
bring the Hindu tradition of the chakras, which is, as I say, intuitive and inspirational,
Right.
together with Western research, because that's showing more and more that the whole idea of our consciousness just being in our heads is
Hmm.
quite wrong.
Right.
For
Oh,
example,
absolutely. Yeah.
we now know that the heart has got 60% neural cells. There's a small brain in our heart, complete with axonal and dendritic connections, that that is like the size of a cat's brain. So we've got a
Hmm.
heart brain, we've got a head brain, and in our digestive system, we've got an enteric nervous system
Hmm.
interacting with the whole of the digestive system. So all these bits of Western research are backing up this idea of whole body consciousness and making the idea of a chakra system a very sensible one. And
Hmm.
then also the heart chakra it's been reclassified as an endocrine gland, and it gives off oxytocin, which is the love hormone, and
Hmm.
it's the love chakra. And
Right.
in a similar way, the sacral chakra, which is linked to that digestive system, it produces 95% or more of our serotonin, which is
Hmm.
our feel good hormone, which links
Hmm.
to our inner child in the second chakra.
Right.
So
Right.
there's lots of links slowly developing. The chakras also, it has this central channel, but it also has a right channel and a left channel, solar and lunar, just as we have a right side and a left side of our bodies. And the research into the left and right hemispheres of the brain matched very well the sort of left and right channels of the chakras. So there's lots of ways in which Western research interacts, well, at least shows parallels with the chakra system, which I like to show.
And I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, and this might be make no sense at all, but I'm going to toss it out.
Sure.
It seems like perhaps the people in India who, or wherever, I guess India
Yeah,
primarily,
yeah,
who
yeah,
um, came up with this system, 3,000 years ago, they were perhaps monks or people who were trying to develop spiritual awareness. That
yeah.
maybe that
Sounds
was
about
their
right.
that
Yeah,
was their goal.
yeah,
And fast forward 3,000 years, plus or minus a few hundred, there's F. Matthias Alexander in Tasmania, well, in Australia at that
yeah,
point, launching a career as an actor and a Shakespearean reciter, and having voice issues that he had to overcome to continue his career. Very different reason for coming up with whatever he came up with and
yeah.
what followed.
And that
And
mind
so
and
you
body
get
are
a
so
very
into.
different system,
Mm,
um, well, different in many ways, but also parallel in some ways
yeah,
as well. And to me, that's kind of interesting. I mean, he was interested in doing something better or doing something with less interference, whereas the monks in India 3,000 years ago were interested in connecting with the divine or something
Mm,
like that.
yes, yes.
Alexander, I doubt that he had those kind of thoughts going for him.
Well, actually, I've got a story about Alexander now that
Oh, well,
not many people know. And
sure.
this
Let's hear it.
story comes from the person who trained me, Don Burton, who
Hmm.
heard it direct from Walter Carrington.
Hmm.
And Walter Carrington is one of the people who trained with
All
Alexander.
right. Well-known
And
Alexander teacher.
yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
and he was a very famous Alexander teacher. And he overheard um, Alexander speaking to the head of the medical profession and about a book he was writing. I think it was Use of the Self.
Hmm.
And the medical person, whose name I've forgotten, said to Walter Carrington, "And don't put any of that spiritual stuff in this book. Because if you read Alexander's first book, Man's Supreme Inheritance, even the title, it's got a spiritual ring to it, that book. There are things in it where you think this man did have some spiritual thoughts about things."
But he was a little cautious about
He
being
was advised
explicit.
not to bring that into his work in
That's
this
true. I
kind of
mean,
way.
man's supreme inheritance, that's a big
Yes,
topic. And then
yes,
his last book, The Universal Constant in Living,
yes,
I mean, he it's true. He did have I think all of that probably came via his experiences solving his voice problem.
yeah,
I don't have a sense that he entered his self-exploration initially with that in mind, but
no,
I
no,
think he was forced just by what he learned to certain conclusions that could very well take you in that direction. But he was,
yeah.
as you say, he was careful not to push it in his writings. Is there anything else you want to say on this topic? And I will, just for our listeners and viewers, I'm holding up the book again for our listeners who can't see it. It's called Chakra Healing Therapy by Glenn Park. And I'll put a link to her website where you can find out all about it. But is there anything else you want to add to what we've talked about?
Well, the only thing I'd add is that the most important chakra for all of us to work with is the heart chakra. That
Hmm.
as the heart chakra opens, it opens the whole energy system up and allows everything to work better. So, and I think we need that culturally. The global problems we face, the heart chakra is a sort of global consciousness, and so it works at many different levels.
Hmm. Wow. That'd be a great place
Start again.
to 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 bring this conversation to
Yeah,
a close. My guest today has been Glenn Park, who is an Alexander teacher and chakra healing, uh, what would we call it? Chakra healing
therapist.
therapist.
Mm.
And if anything that we've talked about here intrigues you, I would definitely go to her website where she'll have more information about those two topics and information on how to order the book, right?
Yeah.
And Glenn, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been lovely. Thank you,
It's
Robert.
been really, really interesting.
Yes, we could talk on forever, couldn't we, really?
We probably could, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
being on the program.